She was my best friend, the one who knew all my secrets until I created the one I could never tell her. Because falling in love with the man she loved was the kind of mistake that burns you alive. And yet, I couldn't stop. And before I tell you how it all spiraled out of control, be sure to subscribe because this story is more disgusting than you can imagine. That night, I went home shaking, whispering to myself, "Don't do this. Don't even think about it." But deep down, I already knew I was lost. I still remember the night she introduced us like it happened yesterday. We were sitting in her living room, wine glasses half full, music low in the background. She turned to me with that radiant smile, the kind only best friends have when they're about to reveal something important. "You'll love him," she said. And when he walked in, I knew she was right, but not in the way she imagined. The first time his eyes met mine, it was just a fleeting second, a stranger's glance. But somehow it lingered. There was something heavy in that look, something that pulled me in before I even had time to push back. I laughed nervously, pretending I hadn't noticed, but my heart was already betraying me. We spent the night talking, the three of us, but it felt like there was an invisible thread tying me to him. Every time he spoke, I found myself leaning closer. Every time he smiled, my stomach tightened in ways I didn't want to admit. I told myself it was harmless, that attraction was natural and fleeting, but deep down, I already knew it wasn't. On my way home that night, I couldn't stop replaying every detail. His voice, his laugh, the way his hand brushed mine when he passed me a glass. I scolded myself out loud in the car. "Don't do this. He's hers. He'll never be yours." But the warning fell flat, drowned by the echo of his smile in my memory. And here's where I have to pause, because the truth is, this story only gets more complicated, darker, and far more painful. If you want to follow every twist, every heartbreak, make sure you subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Because the second time I saw him, he wasn't just my best friend's boyfriend anymore. He was temptation staring me straight in the face. I still remember the way Thomas laughed that night, leaning against July's kitchen counter, his eyes catching mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. I told myself I was imagining things, that a glance wasn't dangerous. But the warmth of his gaze lingered like a spark on dry wood, and I couldn't ignore it. Every joke, every casual touch made my heart race, though I tried to laugh it off like it was nothing. July was chatting animatedly about her work trip, completely unaware of the storm brewing between us. I felt the pull again, a subtle brush of hands as he passed me the wine, a smile that lingered just a second too long. I wanted to stop it, to retreat, but my curiosity and desire anchored me in place. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. Thomas leaned closer to July to whisper something, and I caught the faint scent of his cologne. My breath hitched. I wanted to tell myself it was harmless, that it didn't mean anything. Yet the world seemed to shrink until it was just us, even though July was laughing beside us, oblivious to my unraveling. The tension coiled tight inside me, impossible to ignore. Later, when July stepped away to take a call, Thomas lingered. Our eyes met, and the air between us seemed to thicken. I felt my hands clammy, my pulse quickening, and something unspoken passed between us, a silent acknowledgement of the forbidden. My brain screamed to pull away, but my body betrayed me, inching closer despite every warning. I told myself I could handle it, that desire didn't have to become action, but every word he said, every glance was a challenge. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to answer. Was he noticing it too? Was he feeling the same impossible pull I did? The thought was electric and terrifying. By the time July returned, Thomas was perfectly composed, smiling at her like nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't over. That night, my head buzzed with what ifs and warnings, knowing that seeing him again would only make it worse. Something had shifted, and I couldn't pretend the tension wasn't there. The real story was just beginning, and I wasn't sure how I would survive it. The next weekend, July invited me to her apartment for a casual brunch. I arrived early, hoping to avoid awkward moments, but Thomas was already there, leaning casually against the counter with that effortless charm. My stomach twisted as soon as our eyes met. I knew I should step back, remind myself of boundaries, but I couldn't. Something about the way he looked at me made restraint feel impossible. We started preparing coffee together, and our hands brushed more than once. I felt heat creeping up my neck, a thrill mingled with guilt. Every smile he gave me was electric, every casual comment loaded with subtle tension. I laughed nervously, trying to act normal, but the undercurrent between us was undeniable. My mind screamed caution, but my body was betraying me. July was bustling around the kitchen, completely unaware of the charged atmosphere. I caught Thomas leaning just a bit closer than necessary, his voice dropping when he spoke to me. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and I had to remind myself to breathe. There was an unspoken game happening, a pull that neither of us could ignore, yet neither dared to name. At one point, he reached for a mug at the same time as I did. Our fingers touched briefly, and I swear the world paused. I pulled back quickly, blaming the contact on clumsiness, but the electricity between us refused to fade. I could feel him watching me, every subtle movement amplifying the forbidden excitement simmering just below the surface. By the time July called for dessert, Thomas was unusually quiet, his gaze lingering on me longer than before. I knew he felt it too, that impossible, dangerous pull. The room felt smaller, hotter, and I realized that the boundaries I had tried to maintain were slipping, and I couldn't shake the feeling that one wrong move could change everything. Forever. A few days later, July suggested a casual walk in the park, just the three of us. The crisp autumn air made my skin tingle, but it was Thomas's proximity that set my pulse racing. Every laugh, every shared glance felt charged. I kept reminding myself to stay composed, but the magnetic pull between us was undeniable. I could barely focus on the conversation. At one point, Thomas stepped closer to help me over a puddle. Our hands touched, lingered. I felt my knees weaken, my chest tightening. My mind screamed, "Don't cross the line," but my body refused to listen. There was a dangerous excitement in every subtle touch, a silent promise that something forbidden was already brewing. July wandered ahead, oblivious to the tension, and suddenly it felt like we were alone. Thomas turned to me, his eyes searching mine, and my breath caught. There was something in his gaze, a challenge, a desire, and I felt it deep in my bones. I wanted to resist, to remind myself who he belonged to, but I couldn't. He leaned just a fraction too close, his hand brushing my hair back from my face. My heart raced, my body burning from the intensity of the moment. I told myself it was wrong, that I had to pull away, but as our eyes locked, I realized that resisting him was becoming impossible. Every fiber of me wanted him. The world around us blurred. The falling leaves, the distant sounds of children playing, all of it faded. It was just us, and the silent tension that screamed louder than words. I felt the gravity of temptation pulling me closer, daring me to cross the line, and for a moment, I almost did. Just then, July called out from across the path. My heart lurched. Reality hit like a cold splash of water. The dangerous closeness evaporated in an instant, leaving behind guilt and longing in equal measure. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The memory of our walk in the park kept replaying in my mind.
each glance, each touch more vivid than the last. I tried to focus on other things, my work, the laundry, even my favorite book, but my thoughts always drifted back to Thomas. It was like he had imprinted himself on my brain. When we met for dinner later that week, the tension was palpable. July chatted animatedly, completely unaware of the silent electricity in the air. Thomas caught my eye across the table, a subtle smirk playing on his lips. I felt my stomach twist and my pulse spike. I knew I shouldn't, yet I couldn't look away. After dinner, July excused herself to take a call. Suddenly, it was just Thomas and me, and the silence was heavy. He leaned in slightly, just close enough that I felt the warmth of his breath. My rational mind screamed to step back, but my body betrayed me, leaning into the small, dangerous proximity. "I didn't mean to," he began, voice low, almost hesitant. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the tension of someone fighting feelings they shouldn't indulge. And yet the way he looked at me made it clear he was drawn to me, just as I was to him. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the same warning. This was wrong. Then, a sudden noise from the kitchen made us both jump. Reality crashed in like a cold wave. July was returning, oblivious to what had just almost happened. I straightened, forced a laugh, and tried to act casual. But inside, I felt like I was on fire, craving the very thing I knew I couldn't have. As the night ended and I drove home, every glance, every brush of his hand haunted me. The guilt, the longing, and the desire twisted together into a knot I couldn't untangle. I knew one thing for certain: this story was far from over, and when it continued, nothing would be the same. The next morning, I couldn't focus on anything. Coffee in hand, I stared blankly out the window, the city of New York waking around me, but all I could see was him. Every word, every laugh from last night played on repeat. I tried to push it away, telling myself it was just a fleeting attraction, but my heart wasn't listening. When I got to work, my phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. Just a few words. "Thinking of you." My stomach flipped, and I quickly shoved the phone into my bag. I couldn't respond. I shouldn't respond. Yet the pull was magnetic, impossible to resist. I felt like I was walking a tightrope with no safety net. Later, July called, excited about a weekend trip. As we chatted, I laughed and nodded, but my mind kept drifting. Thomas's face, the way he'd looked at me in that stolen moment, refused to leave. My guilt battled with desire, creating a storm I couldn't calm. And in that storm, I realized I was already lost. That evening, Thomas appeared at my door. Just for a moment, he said. He wanted to apologize for last night. But the way he looked at me, lingering, unreadable, told a different story. I wanted to step back, to shut the door and run, but curiosity, and something darker, held me in place. We stood there, caught between words unspoken. The city hummed around us, oblivious to the tension that crackled like electricity. My hand shook slightly, my pulse racing, as his eyes locked with mine. The air between us was thick with unacknowledged desire, dangerous and intoxicating. And then the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. My heart sank, guilt rising again. Someone could walk in at any moment, and everything we were trying to control would unravel. I knew I had to make a choice, but the truth was terrifying. I didn't want to. The next evening, I tried to act normal, but New York's skyline outside my apartment felt like a reminder of everything I shouldn't want. Thomas had texted again, short and casual, but the words made my chest tighten. I told myself to ignore it, yet curiosity, and something darker pulled me in. When the doorbell rang, I froze. My pulse skyrocketed. Opening it, I saw him standing there, casual yet impossibly magnetic. He didn't smile. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me like he knew every secret I'd been trying to hide, every longing I'd buried deep. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, and my mind screamed at me to stop him. But instead, I found myself closing the door behind him, my heart betraying every warning. The apartment felt smaller, charged with tension, and I realized how dangerously easy it was to forget the rules I had promised myself I'd follow. Thomas leaned against the wall, his gaze tracing my face. I felt exposed, vulnerable in ways I hadn't known existed. "Clara," he whispered, and the sound of my name on his lips made my knees weak. I wanted to back away, but every fiber of me leaned closer, drawn to the magnetic pull I couldn't resist. And before anything else could happen, my phone buzzed loudly. I glanced at it, July's name flashing on the screen. Panic surged. My hand shook as I silenced it, realizing the perfect timing of life's interruptions. It was a reminder that boundaries existed, but the pull between us was real, undeniable, and dangerous. And Thomas stepped closer, and in that moment, the world outside vanished. My mind screamed no. My body whispered, "Stay." The city lights cast long shadows around us, a silent witness to the chaos we were both creating. And just as the temptation became almost unbearable, a sudden knock at the door made us both freeze.
The knock at the door echoed through the apartment, sharp and intrusive, shattering the tension Thomas and I had been holding. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady my racing heartbeat. Who could it be at this hour? Thomas's eyes darkened with warning, but there was a mischievous edge too, like he knew exactly what the interruption meant. "Stay here," he murmured, then moved toward the door with a calm that made my pulse spike even faster. Peeking through the peephole, I saw July standing there, her expression unreadable, eyes scanning the room before they landed on me. My stomach dropped. The guilt that had been simmering suddenly boiled over. I wanted to hide, to disappear into thin air, but there was nowhere to go. She pushed the door open gently, smiling politely. "Clara, I didn't expect to see you here tonight." Her voice was casual, but something in the way she lingered on my face made me tremble. Thomas's presence behind me was overwhelming, his proximity dangerous. I swallowed hard, trying to force a smile, but my hands betrayed me, trembling slightly. Every instinct screamed that this was a line I shouldn't cross, yet my body reacted differently, pulled toward him despite the world around us. July finally noticed Thomas, and a subtle shift in her eyes told me she was starting to sense something. I wanted to warn him, to move him away, but it was too late. The tension had been noticed, and in that moment, I realized the truth. Once temptation touches your life, there's no going back. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, painting stripes across the living room where I sat, coffee in hand, replaying last night's encounter over and over. Thomas's nearness, the heat of his body so close, July's unexpected arrival, my mind refused to calm. When Thomas walked in, casual as ever, my heart betrayed me, skipping beats I couldn't control. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Rough night?" he asked, voice low, teasing, as if he knew exactly how I felt. I avoided his gaze, swirling the coffee in my cup to mask the flush creeping up my neck. "Just busy," I muttered, but even I knew how hollow it sounded. The tension between us was tangible, almost suffocating, and the memory of July's suspicious glance made my chest tighten. He stepped closer, intentionally brushing past me, sending a jolt through every nerve. I wanted to pull away, to remind myself of right and wrong, but my body leaned into him without permission, betraying all my logic. Clara, he murmured, and even that simple sound made my knees weaken. Outside, the faint sound of July moving around in the kitchen reached us. She hadn't confronted us yet, but the tension in the apartment thickened. Every glance, every subtle movement carried unspoken warnings, and yet despite the risk, Thomas's nearness was intoxicating, impossible to resist. By the time July left the room smiling politely but with a distant edge in her eyes, I realized how dangerous this attraction had become. I knew I was crossing lines I shouldn't, yet I couldn't step back. The pull between Thomas and me was undeniable, and it was only getting stronger. The evening fell over the city, neon lights casting a soft glow through the apartment windows. I found myself pacing, heart racing, replaying every stolen glance from Thomas. July was downstairs, humming softly, oblivious to the storm brewing above. Every corner of the room seemed charged with electricity, each shadow threatening to reveal the impossible tension. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt tight with anticipation I couldn't ignore. Thomas appeared at the doorway, leaning casually, as if he had all the time in the world. His gaze locked on mine, heavy and unyielding, sending shivers down my spine. "You can't pretend this isn't happening," he whispered, and the words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to deny it, to retreat to safety, but my body betrayed me instantly. The pull between us was undeniable, impossible to ignore. We moved closer, inches apart, and the room seemed to shrink around us. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, his presence so overwhelming I could barely think. "Clara," he breathed, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face with such familiarity it made my heart hammer. Every nerve in my body was screaming to surrender, yet the guilt twisted sharply inside me. I hated myself for wanting him, yet I couldn't stop. A sudden noise from below made me jump, the elevator doors clicking shut in the lobby. Thomas glanced toward the sound, his brow furrowed, a mix of irritation and amusement in his eyes. The moment was broken, tension sliced, but not erased. My pulse raced, every instinct screaming that nothing would ever be the same again. We stood frozen, caught in the dangerous space between temptation and consequence. I finally spoke, voice trembling despite my attempt at control. "We can't. Not like this. It's wrong." He smiled, almost sadly, leaning just enough to make me feel his warmth again. "I know it's wrong," he admitted, his voice low, "but we can't ignore it either." My breath hitched as the truth settled over us like a suffocating weight. The line between desire and guilt blurred further with every passing second. By the time July returned to the hallway, humming again, everything had changed. Thomas stepped back, masking the tension with a casual posture, but I could feel the lingering heat of his presence. I straightened, trying to compose myself, but inside, chaos reigned. One glance at him, one fleeting brush of hands, and I was undone all over again. And deep down I knew that the storm we were in was far from over. The morning light spilled over the city skyline, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. Thomas was already awake, leaning against the balcony railing, staring out at the streets below with that impossible intensity. I sipped my coffee, pretending casual, but every inch of me was alert, waiting for the next spark. July's laughter floated up from the living room, a cheerful reminder of what was normal, and yet nothing about today would be ordinary anymore. He turned toward me, eyes catching mine with that same magnetic pull that had haunted me for weeks. "Clara," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper, "we need to be honest before this consumes us." My chest tightened, every nerve alight with equal parts desire and fear. The weight of our choices pressed down, making each breath heavy and deliberate. I nodded, knowing the conversation we needed to have would change everything. We sat on the couch,
the distance between us both literal and metaphorical, yet impossible to ignore. Words faltered, broken by stolen glances and subtle touches of hands brushing accidentally too close. "I never meant for this to happen," I confessed, voice trembling as the guilt poured out. He reached for mine, a silent comfort amidst the chaos, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. The heat between us simmered, a dangerous undercurrent that refused to fade. A sudden noise from below startled us, abrupt and urgent, pulling us back to reality. July's cheerful voice called from the other side, "Breakfast is ready." We both froze, realizing the delicate balance had just been shattered. Our eyes met briefly, acknowledging the storm of temptation that lingered. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every thought tangled between desire and loyalty. For a moment, the world outside seemed miles away. I stood first, smoothing my dress, trying to erase any evidence of the night before. Thomas lingered, his expression unreadable yet undeniably full of longing. "Clara," he said quietly, "whatever happens, we face it together." My stomach twisted, knowing that his words were both a promise and a warning. There was no going back now. The game had changed irreversibly. As we joined July in the kitchen, laughter and normalcy returned, but only on the surface. Inside, the fire between Thomas and I raged quietly, waiting for the next chance to ignite. I forced a smile, hiding the tumult beneath, aware that every choice from here on out mattered. The city buzzed outside, oblivious to the secrets held within these walls. And deep down, I knew one day the truth would no longer be containable.